They weren't taken in chains. They were chosen, celebrated, praised as perfect. But the moment selection ended, their lives stopped belonging to them. From that day forward, every hour, every movement, every future decision was already decided by the empire. Stay, and you'll learn how the Inca emperors turned honor into captivity, why purity became a tool of control, and how a sacred calling became a fate people feared more than death. If you enjoy this dark histories, leave a like and subscribe. My mother said I will not reach 1,000 subscribers. Let's prove her wrong. High in the Andes, where the air thinned and the mountains seemed to watch in silence, the Inca Empire built a world that appeared perfectly ordered, a civilization governed by ritual, hierarchy, and divine authority so absolute that questioning it felt unthinkable. And within this world existed a group whose lives were shaped from childhood, not by choice, but by selection. Individuals revered in public, yet quietly stripped of autonomy. Their fate sealed not by punishment or crime, but by perceived perfection. Because to the Inca state, purity was not innocence, it was a resource, and those chosen to embody it were removed from ordinary life long before they could understand what they were being taken from. And this removal was framed as honor, spoken of in soft tones, wrapped in ceremony, and praised as the highest form of devotion to the empire and its gods. And yet beneath the reverence lay a system of control so complete that contemporaries feared it more than death itself, because death ended suffering, while selection promised a life lived entirely for others, under rules that could never be escaped. And to understand why this fate inspired dread rather than pride, one must understand how the Inca viewed the individual, because in their worldview, the self existed only in service to the state and the divine order it claimed to represent. And those deemed special were not elevated for their benefit, but isolated for the empire's stability. And from the moment a child was identified as suitable, her identity ceased to belong to her family, her village, or herself, and instead became property of a system that believed perfection demanded sacrifice. And this belief shaped every aspect of her existence from that moment forward, because selection was not a momentary event. It was a process that unfolded slowly, deliberately, and without reversal, beginning with removal from the familiar rhythms of daily life, severing ties to family not through force, but through ritualized farewell. A quiet departure framed as celebration, yet marked by a finality that left no room for return. And once removed, these chosen individuals were brought to places designed not for comfort, but for separation, spaces that existed at the edges of society, physically and psychologically removed from ordinary experience, where days were governed by strict routine, silence, and constant observation. And here, individuality dissolved, replaced by instruction, repetition, and obedience, because the purpose of this isolation was not education in the modern sense, but transformation, reshaping the self until it aligned perfectly with the empire's expectations. And within these walls, the chosen were taught to move, speak, and even think in ways that reflected their new role, a role defined entirely by service and denial. And while outsiders viewed these spaces as sacred, those inside understood them as places where time slowed and the future narrowed, because once chosen there was no alternative path, no possibility of reintegration into ordinary life, only progression deeper into ritual obligation. And this inevitability was the source of the fear, because it removed hope quietly, without drama, replacing it with certainty, and certainty, when it offers no escape, becomes a form of imprisonment far more effective than chains. And the Inca emperors, believed to rule by divine mandate, reinforced this system with absolute authority, presenting themselves as intermediaries between the human and the sacred. And in doing so, they justified every aspect of the process, because if the gods required perfection, then those chosen were not victims, but offerings, living embodiments of devotion. And this framing allowed the empire to maintain moral clarity while demanding total submission. And for the chosen, resistance was not simply disobedience, it was sacrilege, a betrayal not only of the state, but of the cosmic order itself. And this belief was enforced not through constant threat, but through education and internalization, shaping minds to accept their fate as necessary and inevitable. And yet historical accounts suggest that beneath the outward compliance lay profound psychological strain, because humans are not designed to exist without agency, and when agency is removed gradually under the guise of honor, the result is not peace, but quiet despair, a condition rarely recorded in official histories, but hinted at in surviving accounts. in the emphasis on silence, stillness, and emotional restraint demanded of those chosen. And this restraint was praised as virtue, masking the cost of its enforcement, because the empire measured success not by individual well-being, but by ritual completion and social stability. And within this framework, suffering that did not disrupt order was invisible, and this invisibility is what makes the story so unsettling, because it reveals a system capable of causing profound harm while maintaining an image of harmony and reverence. And as the Inca Empire expanded, incorporating new territories and peoples, the practice intensified, not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. Because larger empires require stronger symbols, and the chosen became such symbols, living proof of the emperor's divine connection and the state's absolute control over life's most intimate aspects. And as the empire reached its height, the distance between public perception and private reality widened, with festivals celebrating devotion while silence deepened within the sacred spaces. And this contrast is key to understanding why later observers described the fate of the chosen as worse than death, because death was acknowledged, mourned, and remembered, while this existence continued unseen, unspoken, and unresolved. A life defined entirely by obligation, denial, and the gradual disappearance of self. And as this system solidified, it set the stage for moments that would test its limits, moments when the demands of ritual, power, and human endurance collided, revealing the true cost of an empire that equated purity with possession and devotion with disappearance. And it is in these moments that the full weight of this dark history begins to emerge, not as legend or exaggeration, but as a quiet truth embedded in the foundations of one of the most powerful civilizations the world has ever known. As the years passed within those sacred enclosures, the chosen learned that the most powerful tool of the system was not force, but routine, because routine dulls resistance and turns obedience into habit, and every day followed the same careful pattern, rising before dawn, moving through prescribed tasks, speaking only when instructed, learning chants and rituals whose meanings were rarely explained, because understanding was considered unnecessary once compliance was achieved. And this repetition created a sense of timelessness that blurred the boundary between days and years, making the future feel abstract and unreachable. And in this suspended existence, the chosen were gradually separated not only from their families, but from their former selves, because memory itself became dangerous when it contradicted the present. And so memories faded, replaced by the certainty that this life was all that existed, and the Inca state reinforced this certainty through ceremony, allowing the chosen to be seen publicly on rare occasions, always at a distance, always elevated, always framed as symbols rather than individuals. And these appearances were carefully controlled, designed to inspire reverence rather than familiarity, because familiarity invites empathy, and empathy threatens systems built on sacrifice. And the crowds who watched believed they were witnessing the highest honor imaginable, unaware that what they admired was sustained by isolation so complete that even longing became difficult to articulate. And this gap between perception and reality widened as the empire expanded, because the more territory the Inca controlled, the more essential these symbols became, serving as proof that the emperor's authority reached beyond land and labor into the spiritual fabric of society. And within this framework, the chosen were not permitted uncertainty, because uncertainty undermined ritual, and ritual was the foundation of legitimacy, and the priests who oversaw these spaces believed themselves guardians of cosmic balance, convinced that maintaining order justified every demand placed upon those under their care. And this conviction allowed them to interpret distress as weakness, silence as devotion, and resignation as acceptance. And in doing so, they erased the possibility that suffering could exist within sanctity, and yet traces of that suffering appear in the margins of history, in accounts that emphasize stillness to an unnatural degree, in descriptions of faces trained to reveal nothing, in rules that governed posture, gaze, and expression. Because control extended beyond action into emotion itself, and the chosen were expected not only to obey, but to embody serenity, to present an image of peace that reassured the public and validated the system. And this expectation created a profound internal conflict, because humans cannot simply erase feeling. They can only suppress it, and suppressed emotion does not disappear. It accumulates, shaping thought and perception in ways that are difficult to record but deeply felt. And for those living within this structure, time became a paradox, because the days were predictable, yet endless, each one reinforcing the same conclusion, that their role was fixed and their future predetermined. and this awareness stripped life of anticipation, leaving only endurance, and endurance, when framed as virtue, becomes a powerful mechanism of control, because it transforms survival into moral obligation, making resistance feel like failure rather than self-preservation. And the Inca emperors, distant yet omnipresent, benefited from this structure immensely, because it allowed them to maintain absolute authority without constant intervention, relying instead on internalized obedience that required no visible enforcement. And this distance is crucial because it insulated the highest levels of power from the human cost of their decisions, allowing the emperor to remain a symbol rather than a participant. And symbols, by their nature, do not answer questions, and as long as the system functioned smoothly, there was no incentive to question it, and so it persisted, generation after generation, refining its methods, tightening its routines, and perfecting the art of quiet control. And as the chosen aged within this environment, their value shifted subtly, because youth was part of the symbolism, and aging introduced complications. The system was not designed to accommodate openly, and rather than addressing these complications directly, the empire adapted by further isolating those who no longer fit the ideal image, moving them deeper into obscurity, where they could continue fulfilling obligations without disrupting public perception. And this deepening isolation marked a turning point, because it revealed that honor within the system was conditional, dependent on continued usefulness. And once usefulness declined, visibility vanished. And this conditionality reinforced the fear that defined the fate of the chosen, because it meant that devotion did not guarantee dignity, only compliance, and compliance did not guarantee recognition, only continuation. And for those who observed this process from within, the realization was devastating because it exposed the fundamental truth of the system, that it valued symbols over people and order over well-being, and this truth explains why contemporaries and later observers described the fate of the chosen as worse than death. Because death concluded the story, while this existence stretched on indefinitely, offering no resolution, no acknowledgement, and no release, only the quiet persistence of obligation within walls, designed to prevent escape not through barriers, but through belief. And as the empire reached its zenith, the contrast between its outward magnificence and the inner lives of those sustaining its rituals became stark, revealing a civilization capable of extraordinary organization and beauty, yet willing to erase individuality completely in pursuit of harmony. And this contradiction lies at the heart of the Inca legacy, because it challenges the assumption that reverence and cruelty are opposites, showing instead that they can coexist seamlessly when authority goes unquestioned. And as history moved forward and the empire eventually faced forces it could not control, the structures that had maintained this system began to fracture, not suddenly but gradually, as external pressures disrupted the rituals that had sustained internal order. And it is within this period of disruption that the voices of the chosen briefly become visible again, not as testimonies but as absences noticed for the first time, spaces where certainty once existed now filled with uncertainty, and this shift forces a re-evaluation of what had been accepted as normal for centuries, revealing that the greatest harm inflicted by the system was not a single act, but the normalization of a life lived entirely without choice. And as these truths surface, they invite a deeper understanding of how power operates most effectively when it convinces those beneath it that there is no alternative. And it is this lesson, more than any specific ritual or practice, that gives this history its enduring weight, because it reminds us that systems capable of inspiring awe can also sustain profound suffering quietly, efficiently, and for a very long time, without ever appearing cruel to those who benefit from their stability. And as the story continues, the consequences of this system, once hidden behind ceremony and reverence, begin to emerge more clearly, revealing the long shadow cast by a civilization that equated purity with possession and devotion with disappearance, setting the stage for the final understanding of why this fate haunted the collective memory long after the empire itself had faded into history.